She was one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, admired, feared, and shrouded in rumors. And for years, she carried a secret that would have shocked her adoring fans. Jeff Chandler was the silver-haired leading man every studio wanted and every woman seemed to adore. But behind the spotlight, he wasn't just living a double life. He was protecting a love story the public could never know. Decades later, whispers from old Hollywood insiders revealed what Chandler had only confessed in private, that during the height of his fame, he fell for a woman whose own past was just as hidden as his. The legendary Barbara Stanwyck. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a scandal. It was something far more dangerous for its time, real. But that's just one layer of a life full of contradictions where romantic rumors collided with personal tragedy, and a routine surgery spiraled into a death so shocking, it led to a lawsuit that rocked Hollywood. This isn't just a story about a forgotten star. It's about the fame that made him, the love that defined him, and the secret that nearly died with him. Before the fame, before the scandals, before the whispered secrets, he was just Ira Gossel, a tall, quiet kid growing up in Brooklyn, raised in a working-class Jewish family who never imagined their son would one day command movie screens across America. He wasn't born into wealth or industry connections. What he had instead was drive. From an early age, Chandler was drawn to storytelling first on the radio, where his deep, resonant voice cut through static and caught the attention of casting directors. He trained seriously at the Fegan School of Dramatic Art in New York, refusing to treat showbiz like a dream. For him, it was a plan. Then came the war. Like so many men of his generation, Chandler served in World War II, stationed in the remote Aleutian Islands. Cold, dangerous, and isolated, it wasn't glamorous, but it hardened him. And when he came home, he didn't waste a second chasing the life he'd nearly lost. He returned with one goal: to become a star. Radio came first. With that voice, it wasn't hard to land steady roles in dramatic broadcasts. But Chandler didn't want to be heard, he wanted to be seen. And after years of grinding through stage work and bit parts in B-movies, the break finally came. In 1949, he landed the role of a lifetime Apache leader, Cochise in Broken Arrow, opposite James Stewart. It wasn't just a hit, it was groundbreaking. Chandler didn't play a caricature, he brought dignity, depth, and empathy to a role that Hollywood usually treated as an afterthought. He earned an Academy Award nomination. He became a household name overnight. And more importantly, he became something rare in 1950s Hollywood, a leading man who could carry intensity without losing humanity. But for Chandler, success wasn't the finish line, it was just the start. And what he'd go on to do next would challenge the limits of what Hollywood expected from its heroes. Jeff Chandler wasn't just a one-hit wonder, he became the face of a new kind of Hollywood masculinity. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that silver hair and unmistakable voice, Chandler stood out in a sea of smooth-talking leading men. He wasn't polished to perfection, he was rugged, sincere, and quietly magnetic. Throughout the 1950s, Universal Pictures knew what they had. Chandler played soldiers, explorers, and morally conflicted men in films that tested his range: Yankee Buccaneer, Foxfire, Smuggler's Island, Away All Boats. Audiences saw more than a handsome face. They saw a man who could carry pain and conviction beneath the surface. He held his own opposite Hollywood royalty: Jane Russell, Joan Crawford, Maureen O'Hara, and never disappeared in their shadow. Off camera, he was known as meticulous, respectful, and generous with his co-stars. Directors loved him. Crew members respected him. He was never the loudest man in the room, but he never needed to be. And while most actors stayed in their lane, Chandler didn't. He sang, releasing records that showcased a smooth, romantic side most fans never expected. He performed in nightclubs and on television variety shows, not for money, but for love of the craft. He even stepped into producing, hoping to gain creative control, a bold move at a time when studios owned their stars like property. On the surface, everything was falling into place: fame, respect, money, influence. But beneath the spotlight, Chandler was already fighting to hold his personal life together, and the cracks were beginning to show. Because being Hollywood's golden boy came with a cost, and soon it would start to collect. In 1946, long before the red carpets and flashing cameras, Jeff Chandler married actress Marjorie Hochel. On paper, it was a perfect match, two rising talents, both driven, both charismatic, and both looking to build something real in a town built on illusion. They had two daughters, Jaime and Dana, and for a time, they looked like the picture of post-war domestic bliss. Hollywood press framed them as a success story, the loyal husband, the graceful wife, the perfect little family. But behind the scenes, reality was far less glamorous. Chandler was climbing fast, and fame rarely slows down for anyone. Film after film, location after location, he was away more often than he was home. And even when he was present, he was exhausted, pulled in a dozen directions by producers, studios, fans, and image handlers. Marjorie, once an actress in her own right, slowly faded into the background of her husband's rising star. The spotlight that once shined on both of them now only had room for one. Friends later described Chandler as a loving, devoted father, gentle with his kids, deeply affectionate, but no amount of love could outrun the emotional distance forming between him and Marjorie. The cracks turned to fractures. Quiet arguments became public tension, and by the early 1950s, whispers of separations began to circulate. Some sources said the couple would reconcile, only to fall back into old patterns. Others suggested deeper issues, things neither side ever fully revealed. Whatever the truth was, one thing became clear. The fairy tale had faded. And the moment Chandler stepped into a new romance very publicly, the entire illusion would come crashing down. By the mid-1950s, Chandler's marriage was already strained, but it was one relationship in particular that delivered the final blow. Her name was Esther Williams, Olympic swimmer turned MGM superstar, famous for her grace, athleticism, and million-dollar smile. She had just divorced actor Fernando Lamas when she and Chandler began stepping out together. And Hollywood took notice. They were seen at premieres, private parties, press events, always close, always smiling. But behind the flashbulbs was a relationship that insiders described as intense and often volatile. For Marjorie Hochel, Chandler's wife of over a decade, it wasn't just betrayal, it was public humiliation, and this time, there would be no reconciliation. She filed for divorce. Tabloids couldn't get enough. Chandler, the all-American leading man, was now at the center of a very public love triangle. And it didn't stop there. Rumors linked him to several other actresses. Gloria DeHaven, the bubbly starlet with a string of high-profile romances, and Ann Sheridan, the fiery oomph girl, known for her independence and razor-sharp wit. Chandler never confirmed the rumors, but they added to his reputation not just as a romantic lead on screen, but as someone whose private life was anything but tidy. Yet through all the gossip, there was one relationship the press never discovered, and it would remain buried for decades. Until someone close to Chandler finally revealed the truth. It wasn't the flings. It wasn't the affairs. The relationship that mattered most to Jeff Chandler was one the world never saw coming. Barbara Stanwyck. A Hollywood icon, brilliant, guarded, fiercely private. Known for powerhouse roles in Double Indemnity, Stella Dallas, and The Lady Eve. But off-screen, she was even more enigmatic. Whispers had long surrounded Stanwyck's private life. Rumors of past relationships with both men and women circulated behind studio walls, but never made it into the fan magazines. The studios made sure of that. According to a close confidant, Chandler met Stanwyck at a dinner party in the late 1940s. There was no spotlight, no red carpet, just a quiet connection. And it changed everything. They began seeing each other in secret. No paparazzi, no statements, just secluded meetups, back entrances, and fake names at hotels. For Chandler, it wasn't about publicity, it was about understanding someone who, like him, lived behind layers of expectation. He once said, "She didn't need saving, and I never wanted to save her, I just wanted to be near her." Stanwyck, who had already endured the studio machine for decades, knew what a public relationship would cost. She insisted it remain private. Chandler agreed. Their bond wasn't built on fantasy, it was built on trust. And for a man surrounded by fame, that meant more than anything. Eventually, they parted ways. Not because of scandal, but because they knew their world wouldn't allow them to last. But Chandler never stopped speaking of her with quiet reverence. He called her the only woman who truly saw him. It was the love story no one knew, and the one he never forgot. In 1961, while filming Merrill's Marauders in the Philippines, Chandler joined a casual game of baseball with cast and crew, just a bit of fun between shoots. But one bad move changed everything. He injured his back. At first, it seemed manageable. A strained muscle, maybe a slipped disc. Nothing he hadn't powered through before. He received injections to dull the pain and kept working. That was who he was, professional to the end. But the pain got worse. By the time he returned to California, it was unbearable. Doctors diagnosed him with a herniated spinal disc and scheduled surgery. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. During the procedure, an artery was accidentally severed. Massive internal bleeding followed. He underwent 2 more emergency surgeries, requiring over 70 pints of blood in total, an extraordinary number that painted a grim picture. Despite every effort, Jeff Chandler died on the 17th of June, 1961. He was 43. The public was stunned. A star at the peak of his powers gone in a matter of weeks. What began as a simple injury ended in tragedy. But the real shock came next. Because his family didn't just grieve, they wanted answers. Almost immediately, Chandler's daughters, through their legal representatives, filed a lawsuit. The accusation was clear: medical malpractice. They claimed that the surgical error, the botched response, and the lack of proper care directly led to their father's death. The suit sought $1.5 million in damages. The hospital and attending physicians pushed back. But after prolonged legal wrangling, they quietly settled for $233,258, a significant amount at the time, though far less than what was originally sought. As part of the deal, no legal fault was officially admitted. But behind the scenes, everyone knew what the settlement meant. And that wasn't the only fight. Chandler's ex-wife, Marjorie, returned to the courtroom suing his estate for $80,000 she claimed was owed from their divorce settlement. Even in death, Chandler's life was surrounded by turmoil. But through it all, one thing remained untouched: his legacy to his daughters. He left them everything. A final gesture from a man who always tried, despite everything, to do right by the people he loved. Jeff Chandler was more than a handsome face on a movie poster. He was a man of contradictions, polished yet vulnerable, beloved yet misunderstood. He changed the way native roles were portrayed in film. He broke barriers in how masculinity was shown on screen. And he walked through fame with grace, even as his private life unraveled behind the scenes. His sudden death left fans reeling. More than 1,500 mourners attended his funeral. Among them were close friends like Tony Curtis and Gerald Moore, who described him not just as a star but as one of the kindest, most genuine people they'd ever known. He was laid to rest at Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City, a final resting place for many of Hollywood's greats. But Chandler's legacy lives on. His star still shines on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 1770 Vine Street, a quiet tribute to a man whose life was anything but ordinary. And as the years passed, those who knew the real Jeff, the one behind the cameras, behind the rumors, behind the press releases, held on to one truth. The love he kept secret wasn't scandalous, it was sacred. And in a time when truth was dangerous, that made it the most powerful story of all.